This whole thing turned into a monster. I decided to drop most of the Logi School stuff, and I still needed to break it into two parts. I may eventually make a video that covers the basics, but in the meantime, I suggest reading the Logi Rookie Guide and attending Logi School. And feel free to join even if you fly with a different community. Yours may do some things a little differently, but it will cover all the basics that you need to know in order to keep you from being a detriment to fleet safety. Links down below. Digression and SideQuest made a video about HUD design for fighting games. In it, he discusses the importance of delivering pertinent information to the player as quickly as possible. Naturally, this is kind of important in games where input windows can be as small as 2 or 3 frames. But what about Eve? It doesn't have any ridiculously tight timing windows, so HUD design doesn't really matter, right? Well, Eve may not have 3-frame input windows, but it does have 1-second server ticks. Of course, it wouldn't be Eve without exceptions, and your client's latency can play a role, but that's a rabbit hole that I don't want to get into. What's important to know for our purposes is that most inputs aren't processed instantaneously, but instead upon the next server tick. So, what that means is that if you take 900 milliseconds to input the command to lock a target, it will take you 1 second to initiate a target lock. However, if you take 1100 milliseconds to input your command, it will now take a full 2 seconds to initiate the lock. In short, things get rounded up to the nearest whole second. Inputs, align and lock times, and a whole host of stuff gets rounded up. Thus, milliseconds matter in Eve because they will be rounded up to the nearest whole second. Now, you may be thinking that 1 second is an inconsequential amount of time, and not worth fretting over. However, anyone who's played long enough has memories of surviving in low structure. Moreover, you may have also seen articles or videos discussing align and lock times, and how things like latencies, server ticks, and various mechanics influence who gets away and who gets dead. So, you can bet your bottom isky that there are hardcore players out there that are taking these kind of things into consideration, and they are using it to gain an advantage over those who don't. Of course, this is a Logi video, so instead of applying the hardcore mindset to killing, we're going to apply it to saving ships. Not only will that help us to save our bros, but it will also push us to get better. In fact, I know an Incursion FC who is of the philosophy that all losses are preventable. I don't know if that's true or not, but it is the bar I've set for myself. I like the goal because it doesn't allow me to rest on my laurels. Instead, it pushes me to look for ways to improve. Unfortunately, some of those ways are rather boring. In fact, if you haven't already guessed by now, part 1 is going to cover things like HUD layout, overview settings, and hotkeys. So, yeah, I know this isn't exactly riveting content, but it is extremely important. So that's why I went off on my big long spiel. I wanted to convince you guys that this stuff will help you take your game to the next level. And hopefully I've done that. But I suppose it's time we actually get into the meat of this video. In a perfect world, everyone would broadcast for shield and in position on time, and Logi could focus their attention solely on their broadcast history. However, we've got new bros, disconnects, players concentrating on their roles, and guys who will fly for grueling marathon sessions. So sometimes the fleet will seem to be on the ball. Other times, the only thing keeping people from dying are the Logi bros that go above and beyond the call of duty. First up, I recommend a HUD setup that is tailored for the purposes of quickly identifying and broadcasting people with aggro. Once again, I know it's boring, but it will help to dramatically improve execution and allow you to put the information in part 2 to good use. Anyway, here's how I have mine set up, but you may want to do things differently based upon your own needs or resolution. So, I'll cover why I did things the way I did in order to help you make informed decisions. In short, I tried to pack the most essential items into the green box, which I call my mouse house. Having all these things in a smaller section of my screen reduces the amount of eye and mouse movement I need to do and increases the chances that I'll notice something in my peripheral vision, such as a player on my watch list taking damage. And of course, my mouse cursor spends most of its time within the green box, so that's why I call it my mouse house. Well, that and because mouse house rhymes. Anyway, I tried to put the stuff of medium importance right outside of my mouse house and the least critical items to the farthest corners of the screen. Naturally, those are the things that should first get axed if you run out of screen real estate. And by the way, I play at 2560 by 1440 with a 10% increase to UI scaling on my main monitor. I love it because it allows me to clutter my screen with even more crap. And let's talk mice while we're at it. You want to try to set your DPI to a level that gives you as much speed as possible while maintaining accuracy. Unfortunately, I can't tell you what you should set your settings to because that's going to depend on a lot of personal factors, such as your hand-eye coordination, your mouse surface, resolution, and UI scaling. So you'll just have to play around with speed until you find what works for you. If you have a gaming mouse, you should be able to download a utility from the manufacturer that will allow you to set different profiles for different resolutions, games, or even activities within a game, such as when using a sniper rifle. If not, you'll have to set your mouse speed in the control panel. And do note, you don't have to break the bank for a decent gaming mouse. In fact, I picked up a Logitech G402 for $30 a few months back. Finally, periodically clean the bottom of your mouse with a paper towel and a little rubbing alcohol. The dust that cakes onto the bottom can create drag. Alright, let's work backwards because that stuff should be easier to tear through. First, having the inventory window open helps me to keep track of how many consumables I have left. However, this isn't super critical for Logi, especially if you bring a fat stack of paste. Next, I like to keep local up in order to keep an eye out for known gankers. Of course, the fleet does operate like a pack of prairie dogs, with multiple people keeping a lookout, so I wouldn't worry about it if you run out of space. I guarantee you somebody's watching. I don't ever click on the logs and messages window, so I didn't place it inside my mouse house. However, it is useful for catching any log entries that I might have missed when they first popped up in space. Fleet chat is important because some chat-only fleet mates will post important stuff in there, like heads up on switches or that they're being capped out by deltals. Unfortunately, players will also spam it with chatter, so I frequently miss stuff that is posted in there. Personally, I think fleet chat should be reserved for fleet-related matters, and Warp to Me Local should be used for chat, but no one asked me. I have the appropriate Logi chat channel in the upper left-hand corner, which I expand or contract depending on what's going on. Like, if I need to see timers and all that, I'll contract the channel, and if not, I'll expand it. Anyway, the Logi channels are used to coordinate link assignments and the cap chain. You don't need to have it up at all times as a semi-pilot, but you better be checking it every time the tab flashes. Unfortunately, BASI pilots will need to keep it open at all times in order to coordinate cap service. The capacitor donut is rather important, but I make extensive use of hotkeys, which limits how much mouse interaction I have to do with it. As a result, I have it near my mouse house, but not inside of it. And do note that the cap donut docks to the screen edges, which limits where you can put it. The first item that I keep within my mouse house is my drone window. I don't actually use it that frequently for logistics and incursions, but I am used to it being there, and it allows me to easily monitor my drone health. Besides, when I do use Logi drones, it's usually because someone is in trouble, so it's not too far out of the way. Speaking of which, I click and drag drone groups into space in order to launch them, and then use the F key in order to engage them. You can set a hotkey for launching drones, but I haven't messed around with it yet, so I don't know how it works when you have multiple drone groups. I call the next window the selected item box. I have dramatically reduced how much I use it, but I haven't completely weaned myself off of it yet, so there it is, my badge of shame. Alright, this one is going to be a bit of a beast. First, I intentionally made my overview long enough to see everyone. Picking out late broadcasts is hard enough without having to scroll. Now, we need to talk about how to properly set up the overview. I recommend having at least 2 overview tabs set up. This first one is good for battleships and Logi, so I consider it worth it because it pulls double duty. Anyway, my PvE tab has just rats, gates, and beacons on it. I spend most of my time on my Logi tab, but I'll switch over to this one for various reasons. First, you'll probably have no problem noticing if you have full room aggro, but it can be useful for checking if you think you've picked up a troll or two. Next, if I pick up full room aggro, I'll stay on the PvE tab and watch for the switch. I'll talk more about switches in a moment, but in short, a switch is when the rats switch aggro to a new target. So, as soon as the ships start going back to yellow box, I'll call switch on comms and then broadcast in position. This will let other Logi know to start cycling down reps and to start looking for the next guy to get aggro. I'll also use it to check to see if the attuning are on grid. This lets me know whether I can start servicing cap broadcasts or if I need to gently remind players to either broadcast or not broadcast for cap as appropriate. I'll also switch to my PvE tab during the first 2 rooms at TPPHs so that I know when to start aligning down the gate. I'm not trying to lollygag in pockets. I want to get in and start giving reps, links, cap, and or pull aggro if possible. I'll spend the most time on my Logi tab, which I have set up to show warp gates and all player ships, regardless of if they are in fleet or not. I use this setup only for PvE, as it allows me to easily spot disconnects and gankers. However, it is a terrible idea to do this for Logi and PvP, as the enemy fleet will crowd up your overview. So to be clear, only use these visibility settings for your PvE Logi tab. I also like to color the backgrounds of ships in order to make them pop out even when my overview is in my peripheral vision. This is particularly useful for spotting DCs. And do note that I don't apply background colors to structures or other objects. Player ships are the most important thing that I need to be aware of in order to maintain a good situational awareness. So I want them and only them to pop out at me. Alright, I used to show all brackets on all my tabs, but drones and wrecks kept making it difficult to identify and broadcast aggro when following lasers. Thus, I created a bracket setting to show only ships, rats, beacons, and gates. In order to set it up, you need to create an overview tab with the items that you want to see brackets for, save it as Logi brackets, and then apply that bracket preset to your Logi tab. And do note that once you've made and saved your preset, then you can change your tab back to whatever it was before. My default sorting is by name, however I'll sometimes sort by velocity or type depending on what I'm trying to do. Naturally, sorting by type is useful for helping to determine link assignments, and I'll sort by velocity in order to help me see who isn't aligning during stage exits. And don't worry, I will cover stage exits in more detail in part 2. I also bit the bullet and created a tab just for Logi Bros. I have it set to show only logistics and T3 cruisers that are in fleet. I've been using it to help me quickly check on Logi to make sure that they are moving and have the prop mods on or off as appropriate. Anyway, I wouldn't blame you if you skipped on this tab, since you're limited to 8 total, and this one has a very narrow use. However, you should probably set it up if you ever apply to become an FC or Logi Master. As for me, it looks like I reached a point where I'll have to maintain different overviews for different characters. I have my lock targets pretty much in the center of everything. I think that's where they go by default, but that's where all the magic happens, so it's a great spot for them. Anyway, if you want to set up your HUD differently, you can move the whole lock target array by clicking and dragging the funny little circle around. It can easily get covered up by another window, so try resizing adjacent windows if you can't find it. Alright, I'm not going to regurgitate the rookie guide, so check it out if you need to know how to set up your broadcast history. Regardless, it's your most important tool for determining who has aggro, so be sure to put it in a good spot. Finally, the watch list is useful for finding your anchor, cap buddies, and link recipients, but it also allows you to keep an eye on some of your fleet mates, as they'll start flashing red as soon as they start taking damage. Obviously, you'll want to add new bros to your watch list, but honestly, the worst offender for late broadcasts is usually the FC, which is understandable considering how much he has on his plate. Other Logi also tend to be bad as well, especially Bazzies who have to deal with cap requests. And do note that you can now color your watch list. You can use whatever colors you prefer, but these are what I use and the general order that I put things in. If I begin running out of space, I'll start by dropping the Triple V and Triple H. Assuming I'm not linking them, I'll then start dropping aggro magnets. Usually I don't have to go any further than that, but if I do, I'll drop 1 or 2 of the reliable semis. They are squishier than Bazzies, but they also tend to be better about broadcasting. And I almost forgot. Logs and messages will temporarily appear in space by default. And I did not know this, but you can actually reposition where it appears. The option is found by clicking on the hamburger icon at the bottom right of the capacitor donut. Okay, hotkeys take effort to learn, but they will dramatically speed up your execution. Like, if you are dragging your mouse cursor back and forth to the selected item box every time you lock a target, you are committing a sin against Bob and should seek absolution. So, the good news is that most of the hotkeys I recommend learning are useful for most other roles and activities in the game. So, I highly recommend learning them because you're going to get a lot of mileage out of them. My hand position is dictated by the F1 keys, which toggle the modules in the top row of the capacitor donut. These are high slot modules by default, but you can click and drag whatever you want in there. Next are some hotkeys that I should use but don't. What can I say? Old habits die hard. Regardless, pressing Shift plus the corresponding hotkey will toggle overheat for a module. Personally, I find the distance between the keys to be a little awkward, so if you don't like Shift, try rebinding it. I think Tab might be a good alternative. It isn't bound to anything important, and you don't have to do any funky finger gymnastics in order to use it, so give it a shot and let me know what you think. Also, I'll provide a link down below to the Eve University wiki on keyboard shortcuts. It should help you to find where various shortcuts are located and help make sure that you don't run into any conflicts if you do decide to rebind. Oh, and I suppose I should clarify how hotkeys work. So, toggle means that pressing the hotkey will toggle a module or function on or off. Push is one way. For example, if you push Control Space once, your ship will stop, but if you push it a second time, it's not going to make your ship start moving again. Hold and select means that you have to hold down the relevant hotkey and then select the object that you want to interact with or act upon. So, in order to lock a target, you'd press and hold Control and then select the target that you want to lock. Naturally, this one is a real time saver for Logi and it's pretty easy to learn, so I definitely recommend using Control to lock targets. Anyway, I want to remap this key as well, but I've been using it for so long that reaching for it has become an automatic task. However, if you're new to hotkeys, I recommend remapping lock and unlock from the get-go. That way you don't have to worry about unlearning old habits. Regardless, I think that space might be a good candidate for remap. It's easily hit with the thumb, it's easy to remember, and it provides a big target for when things are getting hectic. Control Shift will unlock whatever target you left click on. It's a huge time saver for Logi and easy to learn. Of course, I also recommend remapping it so that you don't have to move your hand from its normal resting position. It's probably the first hotkey everyone learns. Control Space stops your ship. So this is a new one I've been trying to force myself to do. Press and hold W and then select your anchor in order to orbit him. F engages your drones on your active target. And do note that it works with all drones, whether they be Logi, combat, mining, or salvage. So D actually works two ways, but I recommend doing hold and select. Press D and then select the gate. You can select the gate and then press D, but that only works if your overview retains focus. If you do anything else, like adjust your speed, then it won't work. Also, don't spam the jump button, as that will actually slow down how fast you take the gate. Well, at least it used to. Gate sliding was patched out last summer, so it's possible that could have been fixed. Alright, this last one is a big one. Using the context menu to broadcast targets is ridiculously slow, so I use a hotkey. Now, you may have heard never to use hotkeys to broadcast, but broadcasting others works differently than broadcasting for yourself. Like, if you broadcast need shields for yourself, it won't work if a chat window has focus. However, broadcast target on the other hand uses hold and select, which means that it's a hell of a lot more reliable. Speaking of which, it works great when broadcasting targets from brackets in space, targets that you already have pre-locked, and the overview. Unfortunately, it is flaky when trying to broadcast from the watch list. For some reason, it just won't work if the watch list has focus. So, if you want to broadcast from your watch list, you should first click somewhere in space just to make sure that it doesn't have focus and then broadcast the intended target. Anyway, I added a suggestion to the small things thread asking for CCP to fix it, but it is suggestion number 1354. So, I'd be surprised if they even read it, let alone try to implement it. Regardless, I'll put a link down below. Like it to show support for the change. Oh, I almost forgot. I remapped broadcast target to the tilde key and used my pinky to activate it. It works great and I love it. Naturally, I recommend you guys do the same. Okay, that's it for the interface stuff. I've already done a lot of work on part 2, so that should follow shortly. In the meantime, try to see if you can make any improvements to your HUD and practice your hotkeys. Alright, don't forget to support all your favorite content creators, and until next time, fly smart.